What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A04s and the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Now, as the name suggests, the Samsung Galaxy A04s is in fact the successor to the Samsung Galaxy A03s. And while this phone hasn't yet made it to US carriers, I imagine it probably will in the near future. So we're going to be going over the similarities and differences between these two phones to give you a better idea of what's changed and whether or not the A04s is really an upgrade from the A03s. Now, as always, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get right into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting a 6.5-inch PLS LCD display with a 90Hz refresh rate, a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're also getting a 6.5-inch PLS LCD display, but with this one, we're only getting a standard 60Hz refresh rate. This phone also has a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So honestly, in pretty much every way, these displays are basically the exact same. They have the same display technology, they're the exact same size, same resolution, and same aspect ratio. So honestly, in general, when it comes to the display, they are pretty interchangeable. The one difference here is that, again, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone does have a 90Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz with the A03s. And this is going to make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. You probably can't tell a whole lot here, but in general, the A04s is going to feel a bit more premium. But honestly, it's not really that much of a difference. So in general, again, the displays are pretty much the same here. For entry-level phones, compared to other phones like them, they are pretty good. Sure, they only have 720p resolutions. I was hoping that would be at least different with the A04s, but considering these are pretty much the lowest end phones Samsung offers, I guess we can really only expect so much. But despite the resolution, the images still look decent. I will say the colors and brightness look really good, especially for what they are. And at 6.5 inches, they are decently large, so if you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, things like that, I do think you will get an okay experience. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting 64GB of internal storage, and with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're only getting 32. And keep in mind, both phones do have microSD card expansion, which honestly, that's not really that much of a surprise, considering pretty much every Android phone does. But overall, clearly here, the Samsung Galaxy A04s does have a huge advantage, having double the storage of the A03s, and while on one hand, 64GB even then really isn't that much, considering these are really the bottom tier entry-level phones. Even at this point in 2023, most entry-level phones do have smaller amounts of storage, and while I do personally consider 64GB to really be a bare minimum at this point, for the average user, it still definitely is a decent amount of storage, and as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, you should at least get by. But with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger as time goes on, 32GB, even if you're not doing a whole lot with your phone, is still going to fill up pretty quickly. So in general, when it comes to storage, the Samsung Galaxy A04s does have quite an advantage. That being said though, another thing to keep in mind here is that, again, this phone is not currently launched in the US, and if and when it does make it to US carriers, there is a chance they're going to cut the storage. They do that sometimes. I'm really hoping they don't, but as of right now, we don't know for sure. So although for the purpose of this comparison, the A04s does have 64GB, giving it a huge advantage in storage over the A03s, definitely take this with a grain of salt, because when it does hit US carriers, it could end up being different. Now for security features, both phones do have face unlock, as well as fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys, so nothing really new here. But I am glad to see at this point in 2023, every phone in existence has both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, unless it's like a $50 track phone, but even then, it's always nice to have multiple options besides a pin to unlock your phone. So again, definitely a good thing. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, let's go ahead and give the fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the A03s. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, both phones do have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, this is one area where there's actually a pretty big difference. With the Samsung Galaxy A04s, for the selfie camera, we got a water drop notch design. Nothing's really changed here. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, again, we have pretty much the exact same water drop notch selfie camera. This camera is also 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we also got a triple camera setup, this one having a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, when it comes to the camera, this is another spot where the A04s has quite an advantage, having again a 50 megapixel camera versus only 13 with the A03s. So if you're taking a lot of pictures, especially using stuff like portrait mode, I can tell you from experience, portrait mode works real well on the A04s. If you're really doing that kind kind of stuff, between the two, the A04s will definitely be a much better choice. Unfortunately, neither phone has an ultra-wide camera, which at this point in 2023, I feel like is more or less an expectation. But all the same, I feel like with the A04s at least, the photo quality really makes up for it. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P35 processor. Now, overall, when it comes to actual performance, I really didn't see a huge difference between the two. And with these phones, for entry-level devices, the performance is pretty typical for light use and more basic activities like occasional web browsing, some light social media use, and maybe watching a video every now and then. For that kind of activity, either phone is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing more demanding activities, then you are going to notice these phones are definitely on the slower side. But that being said, again, compared to other entry-level phones, these phones are by far not the slowest. There are plenty of other phones around this general price range that are quite a bit slower. So while if performance is really important to you, you can definitely do better. You can also do quite a bit worse. And again, between the two, you're really not going to see a significant performance difference. So I definitely wouldn't use it as a deciding factor. Now I did run benchmark tests on both phones using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see here, pretty much the same thing. So overall between the two, although technically the A03s did score a little bit higher, it's so close, it's really not going to be noticeable. So from the A03s to the A04s, when it comes to performance at least, nothing's really changed at all. Now speaking of things not changing, both phones have the exact same battery, with 5000 mAh batteries supporting 15-watt fast charging, and honestly this is an area where I hope nothing ever does change, because despite the fast charging being pretty mediocre, I mean 15 watts, is that even fast charging? When it comes to the actual batteries, 5000 mAh batteries in the US at least are pretty much the largest batteries you can get. So if you are looking for a really affordable entry-level phone that has really good battery life, then either phone will be a great choice. With these, you can expect to get great battery life per charge. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone all day, in that kind of situation, phones like these that have such large batteries are going to be a great choice. And then of course, when it comes to longevity down the road, as the batteries start to degrade, when you have a really large battery, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly as you would with a smaller battery, of course. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time, then either phone will be a great choice for that. Now when it comes to software, both phones currently do have Android 13, which is great. In this price range at least, these are actually the only phones I've seen so far that actually have Android 13. So if you are in this more entry-level segment, but you do really want the latest version of Android, then either phone will be a great choice. But keep in mind, obviously, the A04s is a bit newer. So when it comes to future updates, this phone, of course, is going to be supported for a bit longer. So definitely keep this in mind. Now, unfortunately, neither phone has NFC. And honestly, this is really too bad. I was really hoping the A04s would get it. But unfortunately, at least with this version in my hand, I honestly feel like there are going to be several different versions of this phone. But again, this phone does not have NFC, and neither does the A03s. And being that I have seen some really entry-level phones, I mean, even cheaper than these ones, that do have NFC, I feel like in 2023, it's really more or less an expectation. So not having NFC, especially with contactless mobile payment services becoming more and more widely used, is definitely quite a drawback. But of course, if you don't use Tap and Pay, this is obviously not going to matter at all. But if you do, definitely keep in mind again, since these phones don't have NFC, you won't be able to use Tap and Pay with them. Now, one more thing I do want to point out here is the overall design and materials, because honestly, in that regard, I feel like Samsung kind of took a step back with the A04s. Except the glass displays, of course, both phones are made entirely of plastic. But that being said, I feel like the materials with the A03s, first of all, look quite a bit better. I mean, the red is a lot more interesting looking than this kind of bland, glossy plastic. And in addition to this, the materials with the A03s just feel a little bit higher quality. The phone feels like it has a little bit more weight to it. I mean, it probably doesn't. It's not really that much of a difference. But overall, the build quality with the A03s does feel quite a bit nicer and more solid. Whereas with the A04s, the phone doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart. And honestly, with a case on, you're probably not even going to tell the difference. But just keep in mind, this phone does feel a little cheap, even for an entry-level phone. Whereas with the A03s, the build quality feels quite a bit more solid. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, is the A04s really an upgrade from the A03s? Now, one thing I do want to say is that when it comes to the storage specifically, this is kind of hard to say because I honestly just don't trust the US version of this phone, if and when it comes out, to actually have 64GB. I somehow just have a strange feeling they're going to cut it to 32, in which case I can't really say the A04s has an advantage over the A03s in that regard. But that being said, of course, if they don't cut the storage, or maybe you're considering getting the unlocked international version of this phone, like the one I have in my hand, then in that case, yeah, it does have so much more storage than the A03s. But honestly, in my opinion, even that alone makes the A04s a worthy upgrade. But aside from the storage, this phone does have a much better camera that takes significantly better photos. And even though both phones do currently have Android 13, being a newer phone, the A04s is going to get more updates in the future. So if you are planning on keeping your next phone for a longer period of time, then this is definitely something to think about. Other than that though, there are lots of things like the display, for example. I guess the A04s having a 90Hz refresh rate technically counts as a bit of an improvement, but I can't really say it's that impressive. impressive. Considering the vast majority of phones in 2023 have the same kind of thing, the performance is also pretty much the same, the battery is also exactly the same, albeit there's not really much to improve on that. But yeah, in general, these phones, while not really being carbon copies of each other, are honestly not really a whole lot different. That being said though, if you do want a phone with more storage, a significantly better camera, and more future updates, then the Samsung Galaxy A04s would be worth considering. Now, would I upgrade from the A03s to the A04s? Honestly, no. For the money, especially considering as of right now, you can only get this phone unlocked. You can do a lot better. You can probably get something like an A14 5G for around the same price, considering that phone is available with US carriers. But my point here is if you're coming from a completely different phone and you have the choice between these two, then yeah, the A04s is going to be marginally better. But as an upgrade from one to the other, maybe not so much. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A04s and the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow A04s Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.